The blueprints for the old Blackwood Manor are incredibly detailed. They show every one of its 13 grand rooms, from the sprawling ballroom to the dusty, forgotten servants' quarters. They're precise, they're old, and they're wrong. Because every night at the stroke of midnight, in the West Wing's longest and coldest corridor, a 14th door just appears. There's no record of it being built, no key that can open it, and no mention of it anywhere. But the real madness isn't the door itself. It's what happens to the people who go through it. They're always found, sometimes just hours later, wandering the grounds in a state of calm confusion. They have no memory of who they were, their identities completely and totally erased. This is the story of the Madness Room. Section 1. An Unwanted Inheritance. For Arthur Vance, the story didn't start with a ghost, but with a lawyer. A letter showed up on a Tuesday, telling him that his great-uncle, Alistair Blackwood, a man he'd never met, had passed away. Arthur was his only heir, and the inheritance wasn't just money. It was the entire Blackwood estate, a Gothic mansion sunk so deep in a valley that the fog never seemed to leave. When he first saw it, the house felt less like a building and more like a predator, just sitting there, waiting. Its stone walls were dark with age and crawling with ivy, and its windows looked like empty, judging eyes. Inside, it was a museum of beautiful decay. Dust danced in the slivers of light that broke through the grimy windows, lighting up furniture covered in white sheets like a crowd of ghosts. The air was thick with the smell of old paper, wood rot, and something else. A faint, almost unnoticeable metallic smell, like old blood. Arthur found the original blueprints in his great-uncle's study, rolled up and sealed with wax. He spent his first day just walking the halls, a weird sense of unease growing with every room he passed. He counted them all, matching them to the scroll. The library, the dining hall, the twin guest suites, the conservatory filled with skeletal, dead plants. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 13. Every door, every room was accounted for. The blueprints were perfect. And yet, the house felt incomplete. He couldn't shake the unnerving feeling that he was being watched, not by a person, but by the walls themselves. Section 2. The Midnight Anomaly. That first night, sleep was impossible. The old house groaned and settled around him. Every creak of a floorboard sounded like a footstep, and every sigh of the wind felt like a whisper. Around midnight, a deep, heavy thud echoed from the west wing. It wasn't loud, but it was definite, like someone closing a heavy book in another room. Arthur just blamed it on his nerves and the house's old bones. He was wrong. The next day, he tried to keep himself busy sorting through Alistair's things, but the feeling of being an intruder only got stronger. That night, he felt drawn to the west wing, a long corridor lined with portraits of grim-faced ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow him. A deep chill filled the air, a cold so profound it felt like it was coming from the stone itself. And then he saw it. At the very end of the hall, where a solid granite wall had stood that afternoon, there was now a door. It wasn't fancy or intimidating. It was just a plain door made of dark, almost black wood, with no handle, no lock, not even a keyhole. It was so seamless with the stone around it. It looked like it had grown there. Arthur reached out, his fingers trembling, and touched its surface. The wood was colder than ice, and a low hum vibrated through it, something you felt more than you heard. He just stood there for what felt like an hour, staring, caught between primal fear and an intense, nagging curiosity. The door was impossible. It defied all logic, but it was there. So let me ask you, if you found a door in your house that shouldn't exist, a door that only shows up at night, would your fear win out over your curiosity? Would you try to open it? Drop your honest answer in the comments. And if you're finding this dark and mysterious tale as compelling as I do, maybe help the like button find its way out of the darkness. Section 3. The Skeptic and the Price of Proof. Arthur didn't try to open the door. He backed away, his heart pounding, and locked himself in the study. The next morning, the door was gone. The wall was just seamless stone again. Convinced he was either hallucinating or about to have a nervous breakdown, he did the only logical thing he could think of. He called for a second opinion. Elias Thorne was a local historian and a professional debunker of all things paranormal. He showed up 2 days later, wearing a tweed jacket and a condescending smile that seemed to be permanent. He listened to Arthur's frantic story with an air of detached amusement. An ephemeral door, you say? Elias chuckled. Old houses play tricks on the mind, Mr. Vance. It's probably just a hidden panel for a priest hole, nothing more. Arthur insisted it was something else, and Elias, sensing a good story for a historical journal, agreed to stay the night. As midnight got closer, they stood together in the West Wing corridor. Arthur was radiating anxiety, while Elias just looked bored. Then, right at the stroke of 12, the air went cold, and with that same heavy thud from the first night, the door appeared. Elias's smug smile vanished. He walked toward it, his academic curiosity finally taking over. He ran his hands over the cold, dark wood, rapping his knuckles against it. It was solid. Incredible, he whispered, all the condescension gone from his voice. A mechanical marvel. Maybe it's spring-loaded, triggered by the change in temperature. He was already trying to rationalize it, to fit the impossible into a neat little scientific box. Don't, Arthur pleaded as Elias started to push against the door. We don't know what's in there. Nonsense, Elias shot back, his excitement building. This is a historical discovery. With one firm shove, the door swung inward on silent hinges. It didn't reveal a small, dusty priest hole, but an absolute impenetrable darkness. A cold, dead air slithered out. Without another word, Elias Thorne stepped over the threshold and was completely swallowed by the black. Section 4. The Erased Man. Arthur waited. He called Elias's name into the darkness, but the only answer was a deep, unnerving silence. He stood there for hours, like a guard at the gates of madness, until the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows. As the sun rose, the door swung shut on its own, and with a soft click, it just dissolved back into the stone wall, leaving no trace. There was no sign of Elias. Arthur searched the whole house, his calls getting more and more desperate. He finally found him in the garden, standing perfectly still, just staring at a sundial. His clothes were perfect. His tweed jacket wasn't even ruffled. But his eyes were completely vacant. Elias? Arthur asked, his voice shaking. The man turned to him with the gentle, placid expression you'd give a stranger. I'm sorry, he said, his voice polite but totally empty. Have we met? A cold dread washed over Arthur. You're Elias Thorne, the historian. You came here to investigate the door. The man just smiled, a blank, meaningless smile. I'm afraid you have me mistaken for someone else. I don't seem to recall my name. He didn't recall anything. Not his life's work, not his home, not the family he'd mentioned on the drive over. The man who was Elias Thorne was just gone. All that was left was a shell, a polite lost person with no past, no identity, and no story. The police were called, but they couldn't do anything. There were no signs of injury, no evidence of a crime. Elias was declared a missing person, even as he sat in a hospital bed, unable to give them a single detail about who he was. Section 5. The House That Remembers. Arthur was no longer a skeptic. He was a prisoner in his own home. He dove into his great-uncle's journals, desperate for answers. Alistair's early entries were normal, but over the years, the writing became a frantic scrawl, obsessed with the nightly visitor and the hollow ones. He wrote that the house wasn't haunted, but hungry, that it was some kind of living thing that had grown a 14th room, a place that didn't just erase memories, but ate them. The room feeds on identity, one terrifying entry read. It takes the story of a person and leaves the book empty, and the house remembers. It grows stronger with each soul it digests. It is a library of stolen lives. The truth hit Arthur with sickening clarity. That metallic smell in the air, the feeling of being watched. It was the house's own consciousness, stitched together from the leftovers of everyone who had stepped through that door. The house didn't just have a secret room. The secret room was its heart, and its victims were its food. Conclusion. The Guardian. Driven by terror and a horrible sense of responsibility, Arthur knew he couldn't let the house take another soul. He had to destroy the door. That night, he waited in the West Wing corridor, gripping a firefighter's axe in his white-knuckled hands. At midnight, the door appeared. But this time, it was different. A faint, sick light pulsed from within the wood, and whispers seemed to crawl from the edges, fragments of stolen lives. He heard Elias's voice, not as he knew it, but as a child, calling for his mother. He heard a young woman humming a lullaby, a soldier's desperate prayer. The house was using its library against him. He fought against it, raised the axe, and swung. The moment the steel hit the wood, the house screamed. Not a real sound, but a psychic shriek that tore through his mind. The lights exploded. The portraits on the walls rattled. The floor buckled. He swung again and again, as the chorus of stolen voices rose to a scream inside his head. He felt his own memories start to fray. His mother's face, the street he grew up on, his own name. With one last, desperate effort, he brought the axe down, and the door splintered. It didn't just break, it imploded, collapsing in on itself with a sound like a dying breath, and then silence. The house was still. The wall was solid stone. Arthur had won. But as he stood there, panting in the dark, he felt the wall where the door had been. It was unnaturally cold, a permanent scar in the heart of the house. He had destroyed the door, but he knew the room was still there, wounded and waiting. He can never leave. He's not the owner of Blackwood Manor anymore. He's its warden. And sometimes, on the quietest nights, he can still hear them. Faint whispers seeping from the walls, the lost souls, trapped forever in the house that remembers. It makes him wonder if he really destroyed the room, or if he just locked himself inside with the madness,